Welcome to Dialogues for Change. Life is not a void to be filled. It is a plenitude to be discovered. Today, I would like to share with you some thoughts by Falk Moore, taken from the reader on law and anthropology that she put together. So it will be a little introduction to what anthropology of law is about, taken both from her introduction and the conclusion of the book. An anthropological approach to law inquires into the context of enforceable norms, social, political, economic, and intellectual. This includes, but goes further than, what Western governments and courts define as law. In anthropology, while the social-legal includes formal juridical institutions and their social surroundings, it also encompasses law-like activities and processes of establishing order in many other social domains, formal and informal, official and unofficial, in our own society and in others. While the traditional project of anthropology has been the study of unfamiliar settings, today that comparative perspective has informed new approaches to the familiar. Anthropologists now consider the social-legal aspects of the modern state in two very different milieus. The unofficial but organized social subfields which exist within nation-states, and the transnational or global fields that crisscross and transcend states, some of them official, some unofficial. What has been generally recognized is the fact that even in the West, formal, state-enforced law is by no means the only source of organized social control. Hence, anthropologists have looked intensively at the contacts between state systems and the independently managed social fields within them. Inquiries are made into the way norms are generated, how mandatoriness is created, and how regularities are maintained. On the large scale, anthropologists have looked at the networks of political and commercial transactions that transcend the ordinary jurisdictional range of the state. Attention is given to the legal and law-like orders involved in international, transnational, and global connections. These affect the affairs of states and the social fields and vice versa. The most important characteristic of this plurality of normative loci is that the locales and levels are interactive. There have been many efforts to define the legal in some general, universally applicable way to encompass all of these variations. These definitions are continually being revised and reimagined, but none are altogether satisfactory. For a learned critique of a recent serious try at this daunting and perhaps unnecessary task by Brian Tahama, see William Twining, 2003. Legally oriented anthropologists have on the whole abandoned the definitional issue. Instead, anthropologists are likely to ask in some specific setting about power, control, and justice. Who makes the rules? Who can undo them? How are they normalized and enforced? And how are they morally justified? In addition, they ask what lies outside of the norm-governed domain and is open to individual or group improvisation. How does this optional domain of behavior intersect with the mandatory? How do people evade the norms and do they get away with it? In short, in social anthropology, the domain of the normative is the point of entry into broad questions about regular and irregular social arrangements. It invites extensive and imaginative intellectual enquiries. It is obvious that legal anthropology has been saturated with political messages in the past 50 years. At mid-century, the anthropological project was to elaborate on the rationality of the indigenous legal practices of non-Western peoples, most of them under colonial domination. Law was addressed as a technique for managing disputes, as a local problem-solving method, its style the product of culture and history. For obvious reasons, at the time, there was little direct critique of colonial rule. In the post-colonial world, the practices of colonial governments were attacked as never before. Attention also turned to Western legal institutions and governments, and law both in former colonies and in the West was seen as a rule imposed by some on others, often with systematic distortions. For some, domination and resistance were the analytic preoccupation. but at the same time the culture-minded continued with their own form of legal analysis, attending to the variety of ways that people conceive the world, themselves and the situations, and continued to presume that these cultural conceptions were causative. In the United States, this was the period of the Vietnam War, with its accompanying protests of the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and overshadowing all, the Cold War. It is not surprising that there should have been an accompanying anthropological critique of legal authority. And on the theoretical plane, with the attribution of agency to the anthropological subject, the importance of action and choice modified the earlier dominant vision of normative rules as the central concern of cultural and legal analysis. A broadened definition of reglementary control emerged. Control came to be seen as exercised in and by multiple social fields. The perception that many sites of control existed simultaneously redefined the state as only one among many sources of mandatory obligation. Debating the concept of semi-autonomous social fields and the idea of legal pluralism, legal anthropology redefined its object and itself. Could one identify the newest concern in legal anthropology today? As I see it, exemplified in the three studies I've just described, that concern is with a very much wider vision of the political milieu in which law is imbricated. They inspect the legal data for inputs and events in the global political turbulence of the day. Whether it is the law-related control of intellectual property, the definition of human rights, or the accountability of persons for the policies of regimes, it is evident that nothing is merely local in its formation or in its repercussions. As I see it, their commentary, direct and indirect, on the possibility of realizing democracy is profoundly important and innovative. They are using their fieldwork to show the negative political implications of actions they have witnessed. They are saying that if what they have described continues, open democratic discourse is unachievable. Human rights will be trodden underfoot. Cycles of violence may well repeat themselves. This approach is important because it involves a newly selective use of fieldwork data to comment on the large cultural and political entities which the fieldwork describes. Within the mixed and miscellaneous aggregations that are at stake and that compose the global scene, this approach focuses on the elements that are willed legal creation. It is the potential future of that intentionally constructed dimension that these three works address. They involve small-scale fieldwork that comment on large-scale issues. The two levels are harnessed when the writer asks whether the fieldwork data show that there are major obstacles that stand in the way of realizing the freedoms and accountabilities that are part of the ideal of a liberal democracy. These works ask, what kind of a world is it in which these particular events are actually happening? Is democracy possible? They use fieldwork on legal issues to identify legal and non-legal practices that stand in the way. In the process, they redefine the scope and direction of anthropological inference. They ask what kind of a political totality could accommodate what they describe. Kuhn, Wilson, and Borman directly confront the legal production of political consequences. That is the way they have framed their analyses. They are not just talking about what is going on, they also are talking about what could go on. They are willing to consider the democratic ideal while pointing out how far short people are of realizing it. They are treating their own critical commentary as a form of social action. They are moved to question the damaging effects of many laws and legal institutions. But they are also mindful that in some countries and in some international institutions, law is being used for reconstructive purposes. It can make social disasters, but in some situations it can help to prevent and repair them. When anthropologists are moved to ask under what conditions legal institutions can contribute to democratic practice, they are inadvertently showing some small signs of optimism about the possibilities for intentional action. Such inquiries demonstrate that even a habitually skeptical profession can acknowledge that perhaps things could be better. At the very least, situations could be better understood. To this end, anthropology has expanded the scope of its own scholarly analysis by contextualizing legal field materials more extensively and more deeply. It has always known that law is a major political instrument, and it has always had something to say about the way law has been used. But in recent decades, it has gone further. It has aspired to alter the way law is conceived. These are thought-provoking thoughts by Sally Falk Moore, because it points to this question of anthropology as being a descriptive science, but by dealing with law, which is prescriptive, it is in this maybe uncomfortable or maybe inspiring in between of the descriptive and the prescriptive, of what is and what has to be, and of the fact that sometimes just stating things that are, or making things heard that are, actually do impact on how we think about them, how we organize them. So these are very deep questions that I let you contemplate a bit and maybe deepen on your own, also in this nice book. I hope these thoughts inspired you on this Tuesday, 3rd of July, 2012. Thank you.